Hello. I'm going to continue reading The Clue in the Crumbling Wall as part of the Nancy Drew Mystery Series. And today I'm going to be reading chapter 22, The Recluse of Clover Farm. After bidding Miss Foster goodbye, Nancy and her father drove directly to Hilton. Inquiry at the little village revealed that Clover Farm was well known and famous for its superb fruits and vegetables. Yet, strangely enough, no one could tell the Drews anything about the owner. Fact is, folks hereabout never lay eyes on Miss Flower, a filling station attendant explained to them. She bought the place 10 years ago. To my knowledge, she's never set foot off of the farm since. Then how does she market her products? Mr. Drew asked. Sends her farm hands to town with the vegetables. All her help has been with her for years. They're a loyal lot, and she's taught them to be closed-mouthed. Mr. Drew inquired how to reach the farm. He was instructed to drive on for 2.5 more miles before turning into a private side road. You'll see a big sign reading Clover Farm, no visitors admitted, the filling station man added. It means what it says, too. Convinced that at last they were nearing the end of a long search, Nancy and her father drove on in high spirits. Presently they came to the sign the man had mentioned. A decorative wooden gate flanked by tall hedges barred admittance to the farm. With assurance, Mr. Drew opened the gate and drove up the winding lane. Nancy glimpsed a small white clapboard house surrounded by flower beds. There was an orchard and 2 large fields of vegetables. Suddenly, 2 men in overalls leaped out from the roadside. Mr. Drew was forced to bring the car to a halt. No visitors allowed here, one of the farmhands said curtly. Can't you read signs? We came to see the owner of Clover Farm, Mr. Drew explained. Our business with her is urgent. Did Miss Flower send for you? No, Mr. Drew admitted, but we have important information for Miss Flower. That's a great name. The workmen hesitated. Then one of them said impatiently, Sorry, you can't see her. Disgusted, Mr. Drew was ready to go on to the house despite them. Nancy made a last desperate attempt to gain their cooperation. You'll be doing Miss Flower a favor if you'll let us talk to her, she pleaded. You see, your employer has inherited a fortune, but she must claim it within the next few days or she'll lose it. The men's jaws dropped. Is that the truth? One of them demanded. Certainly, snapped Mr. Drew. Now, will you tell Miss Flower we'd like to see her? She's not here. Nancy and her father were dumbfounded. We've been told Miss Flower never leaves Clover Farm, the girl protested. She never did until last night on account of being such a cripple is the word. Oh, but when that government man came for her, she had to go. He took her away in a car. What government man? Mr. Drew asked quickly. Did he give his name? He probably told Miss Flower. We didn't hear it. Fact is, we didn't see her go. She left a note. Did she say why she had to go with him? Asked Nancy. It was something about income tax. Miss Flower always thought she paid the government every penny she owed. She's as honest as the day is long. But the man claimed that she made a false report and might have to go to prison. This seems very irregular to me, commented Mr. Drew. Assuming that Miss Flower made a mistake in the amount of her tax, she could not be sentenced without a hearing. The usual procedure would be to notify her by letter and have her call at the tax office to explain her side of the matter. That's right. Go, Mr. Drew. You tell him. Dad, Nancy said, looking anxiously at him, it looks as if someone was very eager to get Miss Flower away from here. Before we found her, you mean? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Okay, that was her dad. Before we found her, you mean? Yes. Oh, Dad, we must do something. First of all, we'll check with the revenue office, that is, if I can get to a telephone. The two farmhands, sensing that Nancy and her father were sincere, invited them into the farmhouse. Mr. Drew busied himself at the telephone while Nancy looked at a note Miss Flower had left. The writing showed such haste and nervousness she could not identify it as Floriana's. The telephone call required a few minutes. When the lawyer finished it, he looked grim. Just as we feared, he revealed, the Federal Bureau has no case pending against Miss Flower. Then it was all a hoax. Yes, the man who came here was an imposter. Obviously, it was a scheme to get her away from Clover Farm. The news of what had befallen the owner spread to Miss Flower's other two employees who were in the fields. They came in, their faces sad. The woman was loved and respected by them, and it was feared that she would suffer at the hands of her captor. I wouldn't worry on that score, Mr. Drew said to comfort the men. Miss Flower probably will receive good treatment, but unfortunately she will lose a fortune unless she can be found within a week. The farmhands looked to the Drews to do something about the matter. Nancy and her father promised to stop at the police station and report the kidnapping. The description the men of Clover Farm gave of the stranger was not very helpful. He was tall, slightly stooped, wore dark glasses, and had a beard. Probably a disguise, Nancy concluded. After telling their story to the local police, the Drews returned to the Hampton Hotel. Both Nancy and her father were discouraged, and still another surprise in the case awaited them. On his way to the dining room to luncheon, Carson Drew purchased a copy of the River Heights afternoon newspaper. A startling headline caught his eye. He gasped when he read it. What is it? Cried Nancy. Her father thrust the paper before her, pointing to the item, famous dancer returns in time to claim health fortune. Heath fortune. You see, I read what I have a creative way of reading. Okay. The Heath Castle, Heath fortune. And the thing about this is, sorry to interrupt the reading, but when you're live reading like this, sometimes when I start to read and I make a mistake in the first few sentences, I think, oh, I'll just start it again. But it's a real live reading, just like I would be if I were sitting with you. So spontaneity is required. Continuing on. The story which followed stated that after a long search, Hector Keep had found the missing Floriana, who now was staying at the local Riverview Hotel. For many years, the famous dancer had been abroad fulfilling professional engagements. Then she isn't Miss Flower, said Nancy, her hopes tumbling. Floriana had married a South American dancer, Jose Fernandez, and had been difficult to trace because she had used her husband's name. Hector Keep was given high praise for having found the woman in time to prevent her from losing the Heath fortune. Nancy's discouragement lasted only a moment. Then her old suspicions returned. Go, Nancy! This can't be true, she fairly wailed. It must be a scheme to give the estate to an imposter, an accomplice of Mr. Keep's. Saw that coming. There's something underhanded about it, Mr. Drew agreed, his face grim. Let's hurry back to River Heights and learn what we can, Nancy begged. Hastening through the meal, she and her father checked out of the hotel. They were convinced that Hector Keep had produced someone who resembled the missing Floriana. If he were able to establish her as the heiress, undoubtedly he would pay her well and then take over the estate for himself. Poor little Miss Flower, Nancy said sadly as the car sped along the road. I'm sure she's Floriana. Oh, where have they hidden her? It was a late afternoon by the time the Drews reached River Heights. Mr. Drew said he had to stop at his office to attend to some matters for a couple of hours, and that Nancy should take the car to do her investigating. I believe I'll stop in to see Mrs. Fenimore and find out if she has heard the news, the girl decided, turning the automobile in the direction of the little cottage. I'm making an edit here. The disabled person and Joan were preparing supper when Nancy arrived. The child at once invited Nancy to eat with them, but the Drew girl shook her head, plunging at once into the subject uppermost in her mind. The Fenimores had not heard the exciting announcement. My darling sister has been found, the widow cried, not realizing that the claimant might be an imposter. Oh, why hasn't she come to see me? Please take me to her at once. All thought of supper was forgotten by the woman and her young daughter. Joan insisted on going along to see her famous aunt. Hurriedly, they changed into their best clothes and rode with Nancy to the Riverview Hotel. Madame Fernandez? Or Madame Fernandez? The clerk at the desk repeated when Nancy inquired for the woman. I'll see if she's receiving callers. I believe she's having dinner in her room. While the little group waited, Mrs. Fenimore became so nervous that she could hardly control herself. She began to feel faint, and Nancy brought her a glass of water. I wonder if Floriana has changed much, she speculated, adjusting her hat for the 100th time. Imagine her marrying a foreigner. Floriana always used to say she never would marry anyone except an American. 20 minutes elapsed. Then word was sent to the callers that they might go up to room 32. When they knocked a few minutes later, a voice said, Come in. Floriana Fernandez was reclining on the bed, her back braced by several embroidered pillows. She wore an exotic negligee, which set off to the advantage her dark hair and creamy white skin. Greetings, my dear sister, she said as the three entered. She spoke in a stiff, affected way, as if English were very difficult for her. So we'll do that again, now that I know. Greetings, my dear sister. Vera, I'm so glad to see you again. Who knew what kind of accent would emerge. This so charming child, she is Joan, of course, and this lovely senorita? Mrs. Fenimore was so confused that for an instant she could not speak. Joan clung to her mother. Nancy filled in the breach by giving her name. Miss Drew? I don't think this is supposed to be like a sort of Russian Ukrainian accent, but that's, I don't know. Especially because you said senorita, but now it's too late. Okay. Miss Drew. The dancer looked perplexed, but only for an instant. Yes, I believe my dear friend, Signor Keep, tell me you are a friend of Vera. Turning to Mrs. Fenimore, she added, Oh, I am so happy Signor Keep found me. Floriana. Oh, this is Mrs. Fenimore. Floriana, you've changed. Mrs. Fenimore stammered. Going hesitantly to the bed, she would have kissed the dancer. The woman, however, drew back quickly, as if she dreaded an embrace. I am a famous dancer now, Floriana said proudly. And you should see my husband, one of the best dancers in South America, but it is hard work. We shall return to our home with much gold in our pockets and work no more. The meeting was going very badly indeed. Mrs. Fenimore was so stunned by the change in her sister that she could find nothing to say. Joan, too, merely opened her eyes wide and kept still. Nancy sought to keep the conversational ball rolling, for she was becoming more suspicious. Becoming more suspicious of the woman by the minute. Come on, Nancy, get with the program. Suppose you tell us what you've been doing all these years, she encouraged the dancer. I noticed that English seems to be a bit difficult for you. This is a great chapter. That is because I have lived so long in South America. For 10 years, I speak almost no English. Okay, I need to change my accent right now. Only Espanol. Then you went there immediately after you gave up your career here? See, I elope with darling husband. What? This is going to be like some West Side Story impersonation. I'm sorry. Okay. But how could you desert Walter Heath? Oh, this is Mrs. Fenimore. But how could you desert Walter Heath? Mrs. Fenimore murmured. He was so good to you, so kind. I could not marry Walt when I did not love him, no. To save him much hurt, I ran away. And now you return to claim the Heath fortune? Nancy interposed, disgusted at such a procedure. Si, Signor Keep tell me that I will be rich heiress. I suppose you and your husband will restore the gardens and make the estate a showplace again, the Drew girl suggested. Floriana's pretty face clouded. No, we do not plan to do so. No, we do not plan so, she replied firmly. Signor Keep will sell the castle for us. He has a buyer now, he tells me. But Floriana, Mrs. Fenimore protested faintly, surely you will remain in River Heights, at least for a time. Joan and I need you. I have my career. A great star cannot be tied to our family. It grows late. You will excuse me now. I am not good at it. Doing Spanish. We will meet again, dear darling. Deeply hurt at being so curtly dismissed, Mrs. Fenimore moved slowly to the door, her head bowed. There she paused, the picture of dejection. Your hair, Floriana. Oh, wait, she's talking to Floriana still. Your hair, Floriana, she said, turning to the glamorous woman. When I last saw it, I dyed it black to look more like the Spanish señorita, the dancer said quickly. Nancy was firmly convinced from the woman's contradictory remarks that Madame Fernandez was an imposter, but she dared not say so. She did have the courage, however, to ask Floriana what proof she would be able to produce to establish her claim to the Heath fortune. Signor Keep have all the papers, said the dancer glibly. If anyone doubt me, let him read this. From beneath her pillow, Floriana brought forth a torn paper. Read this. Picture of Bunny. Nancy instantly knew that it was the missing half of the note she had found at the Heath factory. She read the words. Day, the seam, hiding, will make me, then I shall be you. Love, Walt. Nancy did not have the other half of the note with her, but she knew its contents by heart. The complete message would read, Dear C, someday the secret which I am hiding in a wall will make me famous. Then I shall be worthy of you. Love, Walt. Aww, the love story. It seemed to the girl that here was proof Walter Heath had not sold nor used the valuable Welk dye on which he had experimented. Instead, he had hidden it somewhere in the old estate walls until he should have perfected his work. Floriana, meanwhile, had become successful. He had hoped to attain a name for himself as a scientist and thus feel he was worthy of her. Aww. You haven't the other half of the note? Nancy asked, returning the paper to the dancer. No, I lose it years ago. I do not remember what it said. By the way, did Walter Heath have a pet name for you, a nickname? The girl inquired. Oh, see, the woman replied gladly. He called me Precious. Sorry. Oh my gosh. No particular name? I do not understand what you mean. Never mind, said Nancy, well pleased by the reply. It doesn't make any difference. She followed Mrs. Fenimore and Joan from the room. Once outside, the child said bluntly, I don't like my new aunt. Shh, she may hear you, her mother warned. When the callers were seated in the car again, Nancy asked the widow if she were convinced Mrs. Fernandez was her sister. I don't know, the poor woman replied, weeping. Floriana is so changed. In some ways, she resembles my sister. Her height, her weight, the tone of her voice, yes, even her face, but the black hair makes her look different, of course. In other words, you couldn't say after 10 years that she is not your sister? No, I'm afraid I couldn't, Vera Fenimore admitted. Then if she is an imposter, Hector Keep has done a good job, Nancy told herself. I'll have to produce expert evidence to outwit him. Go, Nancy. Aloud, she said, I noticed that Mrs. Fernandez had a rather large feet. Her slippers must be size 8 at least. Size 8 are considered large feet? I guess for dancers, I mean, my foot is like a 7.5, but I always thought I had small feet. So this is an interesting standard that maybe has a little bit more of a sign of the time and what was acceptable gendered bodies. Okay, her slippers must be size 8 at least. Floriana had extremely small feet, exclaimed Mrs. Fenimore. Oh, it's like a Cinderella story. So I thought, said Nancy said, I doubt they would have changed so much. Then the woman is not my sister. I'm afraid not. That's why she's unwilling to help you and Joan. Can't we expose her? I'm going to try, Nancy said grimly, but doing so won't restore your real sister to you. I still must find her. Didn't you learn anything on your trip? The widow asked. You hinted. Nancy did not have the heart to tell the distracted woman any more bad news. She merely mentioned having interviewed someone who thought she had met Floriana under an assumed name. I have something in my eye. I lit incense before, and I don't know if that could have anything to do with it. I'll go right on working to find your sister until the last minute, Nancy promised. Please don't ever stop, begged Vera for Fenimore pathetically. If Flossie doesn't inherit the estate, she doesn't, that's all. But if she's alive, I want to see her again, no matter when it may be. I'll try to accomplish both things, were Nancy's parting words, as she left Joan and her mother at their cottage. Deep in thought, Nancy drove toward home. As she neared the police station, she suddenly decided to drop in and get a report on Cobb and Biggs. Unaware that contacting the police was exactly what Hector Keep wanted her to do, son of a gun, Nancy innocently walked into the main room at headquarters. Okay, now I'm relating way too much to this book. Holy crap. Okay, Miss Drew, exclaimed the sergeant on duty at the desk. You're the very person we've been looking for. Uh-oh. We have a warrant for your arrest. No! Oh my God, this chapter is so, oh my God. It's a good one. It's a good one. This one it bears resemblances to a certain chapter in a memoir that yours truly has been working on. So, all right, that's it for that chapter. I may have time to do another chapter. Now I want to just save this, but I'm going to mark it. But otherwise, okay, thank you for listening and watching.